Good morning friends, welcome to the EduSet live lecture. Dear friends, as you know, we have started a lecture series on microeconomics. In the previous session, we have discussed about the central problems of the economics. In today's session, we would be discussing on basic concepts of economics, some assumptions of the economics, as well as we would be discussing on law of demand and determinants of demand. So for in-depth knowledge of these things, we have with us Professor Kamlesh Kakkar. She is professor at IMSAR, Institute of Management Studies and Research, Maharishi Dayanand University, Rohtak. As I earlier mentioned, ma'am has 35 years of teaching experience, as well as ma'am has published a very famous book on foreign direct investment in India. So with this brief introduction, I would like to welcome our guest, Professor Kakkar. Ma'am, welcome to the EduSet live lecture.
Dear students, today I will tell you about the basic concepts used in economics, methodology and assumptions. Some of the basic concepts which are used in microeconomics are: opportunity cost principle is a very important concept used for taking decision regarding the use of a resource. We know a resource has alternative uses. When we choose one use of the resource, we are sacrificing the other. So opportunity cost actually involves the sacrifice done when we choose one action over the other. The opportunity cost of using a resource having only one use is nil, as it does not involve any sacrifice. This we can know from the example also. Supposing a person can get the job in a bank and he can earn rupees 22,000, and as well as he can take the job of a teacher and can earn 20,000. Now he chooses the job of a bank, so he has sacrificed the job of teacher. So the opportunity cost of getting a job in the bank is rupees 20,000, which he could have earned had he joined the job of teaching. You can take another example also. Supposing a farmer has a piece of land on which he can grow wheat or he can grow grams. If he grows wheat on that, he can earn rupees 55,000 by producing wheat on that land, and if he supposing produces grams on that, then he can earn rupees 50,000. So he takes the decision of producing wheat. In that case, the opportunity cost of producing wheat is rupees 50,000, which he could have earned by growing grams on that. In this way, we can find out the opportunity cost of everything. Whenever we are taking or choosing one action, we are ignoring or we are leaving the other, and we are going to lose the revenues which we could have earned by choosing the other course of action. So producers have to see in which case the opportunity cost is less. They should take that decision. If their earnings are less than the opportunity cost, this means their decision is not optimum. The next concept is regarding consumer goods and producer goods. Consumer goods are those goods which directly satisfy the wants of consumers, like food, clothing, or you can say car, scooter, TV, refrigerator. All these are consumer goods because they are satisfying our wants directly. These goods can be divided into durable consumer goods and non-durable consumer goods. Durable consumer goods are those goods which don't perish after one use. They are used again and again, just like cars, scooter, TV, furniture. They don't perish after one use. They can be used again and again. They have a long period of life. On the other hand, non-durable goods are those goods which perish after one use. They have only single use, just like you can say fruits, vegetables, milk, butter, eggs. Once they are used, they are finished. We have to buy them again. We have to go to the market to purchase them for the next time. These are non-durable consumer goods. So, both type of goods are required by consumers and they are produced in the economy. Then there are producer goods. These goods are those goods which do not directly satisfy the wants of the consumers. They are actually used in the production of consumer goods or other producer goods. They are also classified into durable producer goods and non-durable producer goods. Durable producer goods are used again and again and they do not perish after one use, just like machines and tools. They are used for the production of the commodity and they are used over a long period of time. While the non-durable producer goods are those which perish after one use. They can't be used again and again. Just like we can see, coal is used for power generation, electricity is used for running the factories and raw cotton is used for the manufacturing of cloth. These are non-durable producer goods. Thus, we find that both type of goods, producer and consumer goods, are required in any economy. Then another concept used in economics is short period and long period. This will be widely used in various laws. So, we should know what is short period and what is long period. Short period is that period in which some of the factors are fixed, but at least one factor is variable. If demand for the commodity rises, that can be increased by making more use of the variable factor. In this period, we find that ratio between the inputs goes on changing. For example, you can see, supposing a farmer has a piece of land which is 1 acre. Firstly, he is employing one labor on that, but now when he wants to increase production, he cannot increase the land. So, he employs 2 laborers. The ratio which was 1 to 1 will become 1 to 2. When he employs 3 laborers, it will become 1 to 3. So, this ratio will go on changing because one factor is fixed and we are varying the other factor. In the short period, demand is more important. Supply is less important because supply cannot be increased unlimitedly. That can be increased only to a limited extent by employing more use of the variable factor. Long period is that period in which no factor of production is fixed. All the factors are variable. Land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, all factor can be increased. So, if the demand for a product rises, it can be increased by applying all the factors of production in more quantities. Supposing the demand for shirts in a factory rises, in the short run, he could have increased the production only by increasing the labor. But now in the long run, he can increase the production by employing more labor and more capital. Every factor can be increased in the same proportion. So, in this period, ratio between inputs remains same or remains constant. Supposing we come to know that 2 laborers are required to work on a machine and that is the optimum ratio. So, in the long run, if we employ 2 machines, we will employ 4 laborers. If we employ 3 machines, we will employ 6 laborers. So, the ratio between labor and capital will remain constant. In the long period, it is the supply which is more important in the determination of price of the commodity, because supply can be increased up to any extent, because there is no shortage of any factor, all factors can be increased, no factor is fixed. So, this was about long period and short period. Now, another concept used is firm and industry. A firm is a unit of production which organizes all the factors of production like land, labor, capital and entrepreneur to produce goods and services which are demanded by the people. The main objective of the firm is to maximize profit firm has to take the decision what should be the output. If it has had decided about the cost, then it can take the decision regarding what should be the maximum output that can be produced with the given cost. And if the decision has already been taken of the output to be produced, then it would like to minimize the cost of production. In both the cases, either profit will be maximum or loss will be minimum. And so far as industry is concerned, this comprises of all the firms producing similar products that are close substitutes of each other. Just like we can take the firms Whirlpool, Samsung, Godrej, all these are producing washing machines which are close substitutes of each other. Firms producing distant substitutes are excluded from the purview of an industry. So, in economics we will be studying how the firm achieves equilibrium, how the industry achieves equilibrium, because firm is a unit in the industry and industry comprises of all the firms. So, both have to be studied in economics. Now, we come to the methodology of economics. You know, economics deals with the behavior of human beings, and human behavior is complex. Human beings are full of emotions. It is difficult to test them in a lab or they can't be experimented. So, that is why we make use of deductive and inductive methods to study the economic behavior. Now, what is this deductive method? In this method, we go from general to particular. Regarding the human behavior, certain hypotheses are taken as given and true. They need not be established, and we apply logical reasoning to them to find out what is the relationship between the two variables, which is the cause and which is the effect variable, and what is the type of relationship, whether there is a positive relationship or there is a negative relationship between the two variables. Assumptions are being made, and on the basis of assumptions conclusions are drawn. Just like there is a law of diminishing marginality in economics, which tells us that as we go on consuming more and more units of a commodity, its marginality goes on declining. This forms the basis of law of demand, which says that as price falls, then only we buy more of the commodity, because it is equated to the marginal utility. And on this law also we find that marginal utility of money for the poor is more as compared to the marginal utility of money for the rich. If the same rate of tax is imposed on all the people, then the burden of tax or the sacrifice will be more for the poor people. So many theories have been formed by the earlier economists like Senior, Ricardo, etc. on the basis of deductive method. There are steps of deductive method, which are: number one is perception of the problem. Firstly, the social scientist perceives the problem. He selects the problem, specifies it, what are the different variables in which he wants to study the relationship. The next step is of defining terms and specifying assumptions. Technical terms are defined properly and appropriate assumptions are made to do the research work. Then from the basis of assumptions, hypothesis is established regarding the relationship between cause and effect. And lastly, or the final step is that then the hypothesis is tested and verified whether it is true or not, and then policy or the theory is formed on which we can make the policies also. So, this was about the steps used in deductive method. There are certain merits of deductive method, which are those: number one, it is logical. It is logical that when we find that there are certain facts regarding the human behavior, and on that basis we derive conclusions for even particular individuals, that individuals will also behave in the same manner. This method is quite simple because it does not involve the collection of data, which needs large time, which is very expensive also, and here only by making assumptions we are drawing plausible conclusions. So, it is simple. It is reliable and accurate as well because it is based on the mathematical technique, and we try to solve we try to reduce the complexity to the simplicity. This method is superior to the inductive method in the sense that when data is not available, historical facts are not available, then we can make use of this method, that we draw conclusions logically by making some assumptions. And when we find the relationship between cause and effect, predictions regarding future trend and future tendencies can also be made with the help of deductive method. We can say what will happen in the future. If that thing happens again, the similar behavior will be there of the human beings. So, predictions are also made. And another merit of this is that it is complementary to the inductive method. The results got by the inductive method can be wrong, or there may be mistake in the collection of data or drawing conclusions. So, deductive method can again check that, and so it becomes complementary to inductive method. Then deductive method is not free from criticism. It has certain drawbacks also. Some people say that it cannot explain the complex human behavior. We are taking some facts to be constant, which actually are subject to change, and if they are changing and what conclusions we have drawn, they may also be wrong. Then human behavior is not always rational. It is a postulate that human beings behave rationally. Consumer maximizes satisfaction, producer maximizes profits, but human behavior may not be always rational because human behavior is influenced by many other factors. Then it needs great logical skills. If the person is not logical, or if it is not having analytical mind, he can draw wrong conclusions on the basis of assumptions. As well as this method has limited operational significance because it is based on the assumptions which may be wrong. So, thus according to Lerner, policy recommendations based on the conclusion arrived at by deductive method are full of risks, but this is not that it is not significant, still it is significant. According to Gide and Rist, in a science like political economy, where experiment is practically impossible, abstraction and analysis afford the only means of escape for other influences which complicate the problem so much. So, this was about the deductive method. In inductive method, we go from particular to general. It is also known as empirical method. Here generalizations are made on the basis of experience and observations. Economists belong to the historical school use this methodology extensively to derive economic generalizations from important data related to economic activities. Malthus developed his theory of population on the basis of this method only. In this technique, we use statistical techniques to get the conclusions. So, it is a substitute for the other techniques which are used in physical sciences. Inductive methods steps are selection and specification of the problem, just like deductive method again problem is selected and that is specified too. Second step is regarding the collection of data. Then data is collected from the primary source or from the secondary source, and sample data is taken because it is not possible to take the whole of the data, that is impractical, and sometimes it may be unnecessary also. After the collection of data, it is placed in usable form in the form of graphs and tables, and it is being presented. Then data is being analyzed with the help of statistical tools, statistical techniques, and lastly conclusions are drawn on the basis of this analysis. Thus, inductive method is also having certain merits and demerits. So far as the merits are concerned, it verifies the results of deductive method. We did that deductive method was based on hypothesis, based on postulates, on assumptions which may be wrong or they could not be tested easily. But now with experiment, with observation, their results can be testified. It reveals the relativity of economic laws. Economic laws may not be applying same at every time. They may be differing in different places also. So, it reveals the relativity of economic laws. It leads to easy testing of the validity of results. Its results can be tested because they are based on experiments, they are based on observations. So, these are the merits of inductive method. But this does not mean that it is not having any flaws, it is having demerits also. Wrong conclusions can be based on insufficient facts. If the data is inadequate, that is not proper, or wrong data has been collected, then conclusions drawn will also be wrong. Then sometimes the economists are too much involved with the facts that their economic vision is lost and they can't take proper decisions. There is a need for precautions while using statistical methods. Statistical methods sometimes can prove anything. So, all the persons who have not knowledge of the statistical techniques, they can't use it properly. So, there is need for precautions also, and this method alone is not complete in itself. This is incomplete without the deductive method of research. Thus, we find that both these have merits and demerits, but still both are essential for the study of economics, just like the right and left foot. Some of the theories have been studied with deductive analysis, which are the theories which are based on the human feelings and desires, and where data is available, there we can make use of the inductive method. So, both the methods are used to study human behavior. Then we come to the part of assumptions. Again, human beings are full of emotions and we cannot separate the different factors. So, we take the assumptions so that we can find out the relationship between two variables. Some of the common assumptions are: number one is the assumption of rationality. It is assumed that economic unit under study acts in a rational manner. Consumer, whenever he buys a commodity or more commodities, he is maximizing satisfaction, and the producer also wants to maximize profits. But it may not be true, but still it is assumed that they are behaving rationally. Institutional assumption is that in all economic theories, it is assumed that there is capitalistic economy. In capitalistic economy, what we find that all factors of production are owned by the private individuals, and they are taking decisions regarding what to produce, how to produce. All these decisions are taken by the private individuals, and this is done by the price mechanism. Then there is structural assumption, which state that there is a static economy there is no change in the natural resources, technology is given. And another assumption is regarding ceteris paribus. This means other things being equal. Just like in law of demand, we want to know what is the relationship between price and demand alone, but demand depends upon many factors. So we take other factors to be constant. This is known as ceteris paribus. So we find that these assumptions are very important in explaining the laws of economics. According to Friedman, the assumptions of a theory play three positive roles. They are often an economical mode of describing a theory. They facilitate an indirect test of the hypothesis by its implications. And the third one is they are sometimes a convenient means of specifying the conditions under which the theory is expected to be valid. So, dear students, this was about the assumptions which play an important role. If there are no assumptions, we cannot formula. You will study whenever we will discuss about the different laws of economics, you will have to see what are the assumptions. On that basis, law is formed. And so we have discussed today what was short run, what was long run, what was consumer goods, producer goods and opportunity cost. This will enable you to take better decisions and to grasp economics in a better way. Thank you. Dear viewers, in this session, I will tell you about determinants of demand and law of demand. Demand is very important concept because if there is no demand, businesses will fail. So we should know what is demand in economics, and it is different from the desire. Some people may think that whatever they desire, that is the demand, but actually in economics, demand requires 5 things: desire for a commodity, having means to buy the commodity, willingness to pay for the commodity, related to a definite time period and related to a definite price. How? Supposing you wish to have a car and you don't have the money to buy the car, then it will just remain a wish. Now, if the cost of car is rupees 10 lakh, you want to have a car, you have money with you, but still you are not willing to pay for the car. You want to buy something else. So then again, this will not be a demand for car because you are not willing to pay for the car. So thus, demand for a commodity is the amount of a commodity which the consumer is willing to buy at a definite price and at a definite time period. Then only it will be demand. There are various determinants of demand. Quantity demanded of a commodity is a function of price of the commodity, that is represented by P, by the price of related commodities, that is represented by PR, and it depends upon income of the consumer, Y. It also depends upon the taste and preferences of the people, T, and it depends upon the expectations of the consumers regarding future prices. These are the determinants which we will study in detail also. What is the impact of price on demand? Simply, when the price of a commodity falls, demand rises. You see in figure 1 where price is shown on y axis, price of chocolate is given, and on x axis we have taken quantity demanded of chocolate. As the price is OP1, demand is OM1, and when the price falls to OP2, demand rises to OM2, and the demand curve joining AB is D1 which is sloping downward, showing the negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So far as the impact of price of related goods is concerned, there can be complementary goods or there can be substitutes. Complementary goods are those goods which are used together. Without one commodity, other is of no use, just like car and petrol, blackboard and chalk, pen and ink, they are used together to satisfy one want. So, price of complementary good also affects the demand for the commodity. For example, in this figure 2, I have taken the price of cars and demand for petrol. When the price of cars is OP1, demand for petrol is OM1. When the price of cars falls to OP2, demand for cars increases to OM2. Why? Because more cars will be purchased and demand for petrol will also rise. So, price of cars is also affecting the demand for petrol. This is the case of complementary good. And so far as these substitutes are concerned, these commodities are used in place of one and other. For example, coffee and tea are substitutes. So, what happens to the demand for tea when the price of coffee falls? If the price of coffee is OP1, then the demand for tea is OM1, and when the price of coffee falls to OP2, then more coffee will be used and this would lead to decline in the demand for tea from OM1 to it will come down to OM2. In this case, the demand curve slopes upward, that price of one commodity and demand for the other commodity move in the same direction. Then impact of the income of the consumer. You know, income is very important in determining the demand. If we have no income, we cannot buy anything. Now, what is the effect of income on demand for different goods? In case of normal goods, just like food, clothing, etc., what happens for fruits, vegetables also? As our income rises, demand for these goods increases. When we have taken income of the consumer on y axis and demand for fruits on x axis. When the income is OY1, demand for fruits is OM1. With regard to OY1, demand is OM1. When the income rises to OY2, demand for fruits increases to OM2. There is a positive relationship between income and demand, and by joining these 2 points A, B, we get the demand curve D1D which is sloping upward. In case of the inferior goods, what are these? Whose demand falls with rise in income, like coarse cereals, coarse clothes. As our income rises, we buy less of those commodities. We can see income on y-axis, demand for inferior goods on x-axis. Up to income OY1, what happens? That demand for these goods is increasing. But after this income, when the income goes on increasing, we find that at OY2, demand for inferior goods comes down because we start buying branded goods, superior goods. So, for inferior goods, the demand curve is sloping upward first and then it is bending towards y-axis. So, here we are talking of how the prices of related goods affects the demand for the commodity. There are certain other determinants also. What are these? Taste and preferences affect the demand. If we don't have any taste for a commodity, we will not buy it. Future expectations for rise or fall in the prices of a commodity also affects the demand. If you expect the prices to rise in future, then even the price is rising today, we will buy more. And if we expect the prices to fall, then we will buy less even if today prices are lowered because of the future expectations. Size of the population is also an important determinant of the demand. Higher the size of population, higher will be the demand for the product. Lower the size of population, lower will be the demand for the product. Distribution of national income is also important in the determination of demand. If the distribution is equitable, then we will find that demand is more because there is no gap between the rich and the poor. But if the distribution is inequitable, this means a few rich have the largest part of the national income and a small part of the income is going to a very large number of the poor people. In this case, demand would be less. How? Because rich people have already a very high standard of living and their savings increase with the rise in incomes. Their demand will not increase in the same proportion as their incomes are rising. Then government rules and regulations also affect the demand for a commodity. If government imposes taxes, prices rise and demand falls, and if government is giving subsidy, then naturally prices fall and we can buy more of the commodity. So, government rules and regulations also affect the demand for a commodity. Then we should know what is actually the law of demand. Now, we know that there are different determinants of demand, but we want to know only the relationship between price of the commodity and its demand alone. So, what is that? According to this law, other things remaining the same, as the price of the commodity falls, its demand rises and vice versa. This shows inverse relationship between demand for a commodity and its price. Here price is the cause and demand is the effect. You can see in the market, when the price, supposing we take the example of anything, supposing tomatoes, if the price is supposing 60 rupees per kg, we buy only half kg. And next day we go to the market and we find that price has come down to rupees 40, then we buy 1 kg. So, this way there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. Every law is based on the assumption, and these assumptions are actually, we take that other factors, other determinants of demand are constant. So, what are the assumptions of law of demand? There is no change in the income of the consumer, there is no change in the prices of related goods, no change in the taste and preferences of the consumer, no change in the size of population, and no future expectations about the prices of the commodity. On the basis of these assumptions only, the law of demand holds true. Now we come to what is the individual demand schedule. The demand schedule refers or depicts the different quantities of a commodity demanded at different prices by an individual. Just like you see in this table that we have taken price per toffee in rupees and number of toffees demanded by one household, and we see that as the price is falling from 10 to 8, from 8 to 6, 6 to 4 and 2, and here we find that firstly demand was only for 2 toffees, then it rose to 4, 6, 8 and 10. This is increasing. So this has shown the inverse relationship, and this table is actually the demand schedule, individual demand schedule. And if we want to know the market demand schedule, that depicts the quantities of a commodity demanded by all the individuals in the market at different prices. Supposing I have taken here that there are 3 household 1, 2 and 3. This is for the sake of simplicity. And we take the individual demands, and we see that as the price is falling, every household is demanding more, but their demands differ because of their difference in incomes or difference in taste, etc. And now we will add this. At rupees 10, what will be the total demand? 2 plus 3 plus 4, it becomes 9. It is the market demand. When price falls to 8, now it is 4 plus 5 plus 6, it is 15. This way you can add the demands of all the individuals and can find the market demand. So this was the market demand schedule. And when we show this schedule in the form of a curve, it is known as individual demand curve and market demand curve. So how you will draw this curve? On y-axis we always take price, and on x-axis we take the demand. And when you show the price, you know you have to show up to 10, so you will take the proper intervals and they will be of the same distance. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 I have taken, and on the x-axis I have taken the demand. And what you do? You see what is the price, just like when the price is rupees 10 and what is the demand, it is 2, so we get 1 point. And when price is 8, demand is 4, you get the other point. When price is 6 and demand also increases to 6. So this way you get the different points, and by joining that you get the demand curve which is sloping upward. So here DD1 is the individual demand curve because we have shown the demand of only one individual. Then we move on to the market demand curve. Market demand curve naturally shows the demand by all the individuals. Again we will show demand on x-axis and price on the y-axis. Now the same way we will draw this curve, that price is rupees 10 and the total market demand is 9, and when it is 8 it increases to 15. So what you are finding, that as the price is falling, demand is rising. So market demand curve is also sloping downward. The difference is only that it is somewhat flatter because it shows more demand. Market demand will be always greater than the individual demand because there are so many individuals buying the product in the market. So this was about individual demand curve and market demand curve. Now we come to the question, why does demand curve slope downward from left to right? What are the reasons why we buy more when the price falls and why we buy less when the price rises? There are mainly 5 reasons for this. First is the income effect. What is this income effect? As the price of a commodity falls, now in order to buy the same amount of the commodity which we were previously buying, we need less money. So some of the money is left with us as extra money. That is known as increase in real income, and with this increased income you can buy more of the product. We can take an example. Supposing you buy 1 kg of apple every day. One day you find that price is rupees 100 per kg, so you take 100 rupees note and buy 1 kg apples. Next day again you have taken 100 rupees with you to buy the apples, and you find that price has come down to rupees 50. Now you need only 50 rupees to buy 1 kg of the apples. So 50 rupees are extra with you. With that you can buy more of the apples. So as the price falls, real income rises, and as the price rises, real income falls, and accordingly demand changes because of the income effect. The second is the substitution effect. I told you that commodities can be substituted for each other. So the commodities which are substitutes, we will see what are their relative prices, just like tea and coffee. If the price of one commodity falls, it becomes cheaper than the other commodity. So it will be substituted for the costlier one. If the price of coffee falls, it will be substituted for tea. So naturally the demand for coffee will rise, because the persons who were taking tea, now they are also taking coffee. So demand rises because of the substitution effect also. Then the third reason is law of diminishing marginal utility. This is a very important law in economics, which tells us that as we go on consuming more and more units of a commodity, its marginal utility goes on declining. So what we do? We compare the price with the marginal utility and buy the commodity up to the point where price is equal to the marginal utility. Now when the price falls, now the marginal utility will be more. So in order to bring down and equate it to the new price, we buy more of the commodity. And when the price rises, in that case marginal utility will be less, and in order to increase that, we will buy less of the commodity. So thus law of diminishing marginal utility also explains this. More uses of the commodity which is having more than one use, if its price falls, it will be used for more purposes, and when its price is high, it will be used only for very important, for specific purpose. For example, we can take the example of electricity. If electricity is cheap, if rates are very low, then electricity will be used for various purposes, for lighting, for using of the electric gadgets, like we can use microwaves, as well as we can use washing machines, we can use ACs, etc. But if we come to know that the electricity rate has become very high, then we will not be using it for the various purpose, we will be using it for the lighting, we will try to demand it less. So that tells us that uses of a commodity also affect the law of demand. New consumers. When the price of the commodity falls, some consumers who were not able to buy the commodity earlier, then now they can buy the commodity. When the price of apple is rupees 150 per kg, there may be many persons who can't afford to buy the apples. But when the price comes down to 100, many other persons can buy, and when price comes down to supposing 50 rupees per kg, even the poor people can afford to buy the apples. So demand will rise because of the new consumers. So thus we have now discussed why this demand curve slopes downward from left to right. And there are certain exceptions of the law of demand. What are these? That as the price rises, demand does not fall, or demand also rises, and with fall in price, demand does not fall. What are these cases? In case of the given goods, with rise in price, demand rises, and with fall in price, demand falls. Why? Sometimes people think when the price is very high, it is a superior commodity, and they start buying more of that. and if the price falls, they think it is very inferior commodity and buy less. In the diagram you can see, when the price is OP1, demand is OM1, when the price falls to OP2, demand also falls. So, this is the case of given goods, and here demand curve slopes upward. When there is expectation of future rise or fall in prices, then also law of demand does not hold. This I have told you earlier also, that if we expect the prices to rise in future, then even at rising prices we will buy more, and if we expect prices to fall, then we will buy less even at lower prices. Then goods of social prestige are also demanded more at high prices, because rich people have too much money, they want to show off the wealth. If the prices of diamonds are rising, they will buy more of that, that will not reduce the demand. So, this was about the exceptions of law of demand. Then we see what is the movement along the demand curve and shifts in the demand curve. We have extension in demand and contraction in demand. What is that? When demand for a commodity increases due to fall in its price, it is known as extension in demand. Just like in this diagram I have shown that as price falls from OP1 to OP2, demand rises from OM1 to OM2. We move from the point A to B, and this is extension in demand. This is taking place because of the change in price alone. There is a movement along the demand curve. And in contraction in demand, what happens? Due to rise in the price of the commodity, demand falls. As the price rises from OP1 to OP2, demand comes down from OM1 to OM2. In the market, we buy less when the price increases. That is actually contraction in demand. We are moving along the same demand curve. Now we are moving from B to A. So, this is about the contraction in demand. Now, this contraction and extension is also known as the change in quantity demanded, and now we will discuss what is increase in demand and what is decrease in demand. Actually, increase and decrease in demand takes place not because of the price, but because of the other factors of production. How? If demand rises due to decrease in the price of complementary good, or because of the rise in income of the people, or because of rise in the population, then it is increase in demand. We can also show in this same price, we demand more. Price is same, but we are demanding more. Why? Because our income has increased. Or at the more price, we are demanding the same amount, we have not reduced it. This is the case of increase in demand. We buy the same amount of milk, even prices are rising because our incomes have increased. Now, this can be shown in the diagram. Price is again shown on y axis, demand on x axis, and how you take? Firstly, you take the demand curve DD, and now you take any point. Supposing I have taken this, that first price is OP1 and demand is OM1. Now, what we do? At the same price, I show more demand and I get a point B where I have shown more demand OM2. And if the price rises to OP, then demand does not fall, it remains OM1 and I get a point A. So, joining the points A and B, we get a demand curve D1, and that is shifted to the right of the earlier demand curve. This shows the increase in demand for the commodity. And next is decrease in demand. So, again this decrease in demand will be there when the demand falls not due to change in price of the commodity, but it is due to other factors, due to the other determinants. They can be that there is fall in income of the people, that is why they demand less, or the price of the substitute has fallen, then also they demand less. So, we can show at the same price there is less demand, or at less price same is demanded. So, you see in this diagram, and again I take the first demand curve DD, and I take that at OP1 demand was OM1 on the earlier demand curve, but now it has come down to OM, and at the reduced price OP demand is OM1, it has not increased at all. So, joining AB we get the curve D1 D1, that is decrease in the demand. So, dear viewers, whatever we have studied today regarding the demand schedules and regarding the law of demand, that is very important for producers as well as policy makers. A producer can see from the demand schedule what is the demand at different prices. So, accordingly he can set the price, he can sell more at low prices. So, he can decide whether he wants to sell more or he wants to sell less, and accordingly take the decisions regarding the production of the commodity. This is also important for finance minister. By looking at the demand schedule, he can see that what are the commodities whose demand does not fall even with a rise in price. So, on that commodities he can impose the taxes, and the commodities whose demand falls too much with the rise in price, those commodities should not be taxed. So, thus we see that this law of demand is very important for producers as well as policy makers, and we should know that why decrease in demand, why there are shifts in demand, etc. This is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for this productive session. Thank you viewers for watching our program. We would be having more program on microeconomics. Till then, goodbye, take care.